Okay, welcome back to the Iron Sights podcast. We are talking diet, nutrition today. More specifically, how do you stay satiated or keep that feeling of being full when you go into that caloric deficit, when you're trying to lose body fat or lose weight? This topic came up for me because it is that time of year. Everybody's like, oh God, the summer has arrived and I'm not as lean as I would like to be. So it must mean I just need to cut calories. And so that's the first thing that happens. There's a few things some weird behaviors tend to happen around this time, but there's folks out there that are trying to do this smart. And no matter who you are, where you're coming from, and how many times you've done this, even if talk to any pro bodybuilder or physique athlete that has to cut, like when you do that, you're going to be hungry. And that's part of the process. The only way to lose weight by definition is to be in a caloric deficit, right? So there are a lot of things that go into that. We talk about that here on the show a lot. But at the same time, like when you go into that caloric deficit, it's going to create some things, and those things can be uncomfortable. They can drive even funkier behaviors, and that's what gets people into trouble a little bit. But I think there's some ways to manage around this. So I want to bring Steven in. So we got Steven, Ryan, and Cece, and we're going to talk about some stuff on how to handle this little challenge.
So I would say to start the conversation, let's agree on an understanding as far as the calorie deficit itself. Is this an appropriate calorie deficit to begin with?
Great point.
When I say an appropriate calorie deficit, I don't mean a crash diet. I don't mean slashing your calories in half. I'm talking about a caloric deficit of 300 to 500 calories below your maintenance or below your total daily energy expenditure. So start there first, that your calorie deficit you're not overzealous with your calorie deficit, because hunger will certainly come with that. It's going to be unsustainable, and there could be a lot of negative downstream effects from overdoing it as far as a calorie deficit. So let's get that understanding squared away first, and then we can address, yes, some of the hunger that could take place. And it's funny that we brought this topic to the table today because I was just having this conversation with somebody like 2 days ago. Weird. As far as an individual who has gotten into a deficit, and he's like, man, I'm dealing with some constant hunger right now. I'm dealing with regular hunger. And the first thing that I told him was, that's actually a good sign. It's actually a good sign that you are feeling some hunger, because that tells me as your coach that you're actually in a deficit, or more than likely actually in a deficit. I would say a less advantageous response would be, I'm in this calorie deficit, whatever, 1,700 calories, and I don't notice any change in my hunger. That tells me either you're eating more than you think you actually are, your tracking isn't accurate, or we may be dealing with some metabolic downregulation. So for this individual, I was like, you know what? It's a good thing, actually, that you are experiencing some hunger. And then I went into a few of the tips that we can go over today as far as how to address that.
Yeah, so this is a very appropriate response. There's things happening, right? Your body is obviously recognizing that, I'm not getting as much fuel as you usually give me. And so that starts sending signals, right? Those are very natural signals that your body will send you. It's part of our deep-rooted, survival mechanisms. Like, you're hungry, dude, you need to eat. What's going on there? Obviously, there's some physical things you can feel, empty stomach, a little growly, maybe a little upset stomach. Might be some emotional things that go in there. Might feel a little antsy.
I get very hangry.
Hangry, yeah.
Very, very hangry.
What's going on there? There's, obviously a drop in blood sugar triggers other things. So if your blood sugar's starting to get low, the hormones switch on to say, hey, dude, you need to eat a little bit. Or there's things that happen to try to figure out a way to balance that blood sugar, right? There's things happening in the brain chemically. There's things happening in the stomach chemically, or let's call it the GI tract, or the second brain, that are happening chemically. So this is not weird. It's not unknown, and you are not feeling anything more or less than somebody else would feel or is feeling. So you're not special.
Natural response.
Yeah, it's a very natural response. And I think it's important that you understand that the folks understand that this is a chemical process as well as a physical process. The physiological always precedes the physical. So if you are feeling something, that's because something physiologically is happening there. And to your point, Stephen, this is very appropriate. That's what you're asking it to do. In going into this deficit, is to basically switch these things on. So you have to have your head wrapped around that first. Like, you're going to feel this. Okay, so what are some of the things to get around it?
Yeah, you'll have to You'll have to deal with it to a degree, but obviously we want this calorie deficit to be successful. We want it to be sustainable. We don't want somebody to be miserable, feeling restricted, because then we can switch over to like a binge restrict type of cycle where you essentially snap or crack and like, you know what, I'm starving. I'm just going to go after it. And then we can sabotage the results that we're trying to get if you're doing that regularly enough, at least.
Yeah, sorry, let me just jump in here on that restriction piece, because that's what you're doing. You're going to be restricting something. You're going to probably be restricting timing, right? On what, and I'm sure Steven's going to get into this, but you're going to be restricting timing or managing timing differently. You could look at it kind of two ways. There's obviously a restriction of calories, so you're not taking in as much. And you might be also restricting your energy expenditure, like, and how you're doing that. Maybe you're cutting your workouts back, or maybe you might even be expending more. But that restriction is something you're going to have to have to get around. And something that's important to note here: all those chemical processes, once they start in, the switching them off doesn't happen right away. So going back to like the binge piece, like, so if I overeat, right, my body's super hungry, it takes a while for that. I'm eating and I'm trying to get full. It takes a while for that chemical process to switch on, to then get to the brain, to then get back and go, hey dude, you're full. Well, you were actually full minutes ago, right? A while ago. And you're just eating beyond, the timing or the sequencing of how quickly that signaling can work. And that's important to note too. I'm trying to feel full, but now I'm over full, whether I know it, I may be over known or not. And that's where that overeating, binging piece can really wreak havoc.
Yeah, it can become sort of like an impulsive or compulsive eating, 100%. Almost unconscious eating. So we'll talk about that as far as eating slowly, eating mindfully, how we allow enough time for those signals to get from the brain back to the stomach to let you know that you actually have had enough. But the dead horse that will always have to be beaten again and again. If you're trying to mitigate hunger on a caloric deficit, you need to be eating enough protein.
Yep.
Yeah. Sure. Again, with the protein. Especially on a caloric deficit, I typically recommend that 25 to 30% of total calories coming from protein. You'd likely want to be closer to that 30% side of the spectrum on a calorie deficit. And there's a few reasons for that. Protein just tends to be more filling, tends to be more satiating, and that can actually be an obstacle to folks who are increasing their protein consumption. So you can use that to your advantage as far as sort of filling yourself up on protein, again, to an appropriate extent. But you're also going to get, a little bit more kickback as far as like thermic effect of food and the caloric expenditure, consuming a higher percentage of protein. So you're getting a little extra calorie burn digesting protein versus digesting carbs or fats. So that would be the place that I would certainly start. And that's the first thing that I recommend, is increasing that protein consumption.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I want to keep talking about the protein topic, but I just had a last thought about kind of what we were talking about physiological and hormone response and all that. Another horse that we like to beat all the time too, even before like the specific habits around nutrition specifically, I think really, really important is that you are getting good quality sleep. Because we talked about kind of those like binge, the restrict binge and like the hormone signaling and the signaling of I'm full or I'm hungry. If you're getting shitty sleep regularly, those signals are the wrong things are getting amplified and the good ones are getting turned down. So we can go obviously right back to the protein talk, but I think before even all that, if you're getting shitty sleep while you're already overstressed and in a caloric deficit and still trying to train and still trying to do all these things, you're just digging yourself into a bigger hole to set all those physiological mechanisms on a cascading effect that is a downstream effect of being negative, right? Not helping you in the situation.
Like anything that we talk about with fitness or nutrition, consistency is the key, and you want to find, and your body loves finding a balance, and that's sometimes the challenging thing for people. It's found a balance that you don't like, right? Because you're holding on to weight, not losing weight at the rate you want to, feeling tired, whatever else, not feeling fatigued. But it also likes to find a state in whatever mode of weight loss or weight gain that you're in. When I say it likes, I don't like to give the metabolism in your body a persona, but it's just how we're built, right? So the body likes to find whatever, again, the equilibrium, homeostasis, however you want to look at it. It likes to find that. So the things that you need to be doing are maintaining the foundational fundamentals, and sleep being a primary one. with that. And again, going back, you mentioned it like with hormone responses specific to cortisol, blood sugar, glucagon, insulin, those type of things. Those are directly impacted by your sleep cycle, sleep patterns, how much quality sleep you may or may not be getting. So I think it's a good one. But back to the protein piece, one of the things you added there was making sure you're getting enough. And I think you referenced, we had this conversation before about people being challenged when they're trying to bulk and be in a surplus, getting that protein in because of how much work that takes. And one of the suggestions Ryan brought to the table was, when he's bulking, is eating a lot of ground meat because it takes less digestive time in order to break that down. Well, in this case, you could reverse that. Instead of eating the ground meat, maybe you're going with more of the whole steak, the whole chicken. Those meats where it takes a little bit more work. Number one, to get it into the mouth and then into the gut. But then once it's in there, it takes a little longer to break it down, right? And so going back to thermic effect of food, you could get a little bit of an uptick in terms of percentage of calories burned, but it's also going to sit in there a little bit longer, take a little bit longer to process, and could help you feel that feeling of fullness maybe a little longer while still getting the benefits, obviously, getting your protein.
Yeah, so that's where I would always start. And like you said, the sleep is something that's always working in the background. That's almost, like an unspoken, but maybe it should be spoken, given that none of this stuff works if you're sleeping poorly. You're not going to exercise well. You're not going to recover well. Your metabolism is going to be shaky. So that's always working in the background. The protein, like you said, Scott, has that effect of sort of slowing digestion speed, which can aid in the regulation of your blood sugar. And the other one that I always point to that does the same thing, but probably even more effectively, is fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeking protein and you're seeking fiber, seeking that fiber intake. And that can be beneficial for a number of reasons. Probably the number one is just the effect that fiber has in the gut as far as slowing digestion speed, as far as slowing the rate at which glucose is getting into the bloodstream and stabilizing your blood sugar. Because a lot of times cravings, hunger comes from that blood sugar drop that we talked about. I just, say somebody who is more of an advanced user and has a lot of muscle mass and has been cruising along at a surplus or a maintenance, and then we get into the deficit, that individual is going to experience the hunger signals more acutely and more intensely, and could get those type of blood sugar fluctuations and blood sugar drops where you're getting into your workout and you're feeling dizzy, or like the darkness is gathering, you're feeling foggy. So the effect, what happens is then you crave, like, I'm hungry, I'm going to stuff my face, because it almost becomes this automatic response, your body trying to raise your blood sugar back to where it needs to be. Unfortunately, we tend to overshoot, and then we end up on this roller coaster of blood sugar spikes, blood sugar crash, crave, hungry, spike, crave, spike, and we're doing that all day long. So the protein and fiber helps stabilize that process. So we're not on this blood sugar roller coaster. We have a nice kind of steady state as far as glucose in the bloodstream. So the fiber is also low calorie, and it tends to be sort of high volume, and also, requires more energy to digest. So same thing when somebody is struggling to increase their fiber consumption. Oftentimes the obstacle is, I feel bloated, I feel full, I feel plugged up, whatever the case may be. And so you can use that to your advantage on a calorie deficit, sort of filling your stomach a little bit with fiber. And that's going to have all kinds of benefits as far as cholesterol levels, as far as the health of your microbiome. I'm a big fiber guy.
Yeah, fiber got way, I think, overrated for a long time. And then it became almost underrated. Like, I don't want to say villainized, but like, you don't need this. If you go into the carnivore camp, and you kind of listen to kind of some of the things that they say, like, you don't actually need fiber. There are applications for fiber, and there's a lot of benefits that come with fiber, and there's plenty of science that supports all this. So that's not an argument that I think a lot of the experts would make. If you have something to sell in terms of a diet plan or a diet tribe or whatever, then I could see where you could lean one way or cherry pick certain evidence that may be out there that could contradict that some other way. But in general, people agree, like, fiber is important, and that's one of the reasons. So when you're talking about that, like, and people are like, what does that mean, dude? Should I be like drinking Metamucil, in the morning? Like, how do you suggest people adjust their fiber intake, and with what type of fiber when we talk about like soluble versus insoluble?
So First thing I would say is don't try to go too hard, too quick with fiber, because you could get some digestive upset that comes with that. There is an adjustment process that your digestive tract needs to make when you're consuming fiber. I looked at you and I smirked because I thought of the Catalina Crunch incident of 2023 or whenever that was.
I did
the same thing.
I think it's worth a digression.
So, if we've heard of Catalina Crunch, it's a protein cereal. It's pretty delicious. And I knew
delicious.
It's pretty delicious. Yeah, I like it. And
high protein and high fiber.
Quite a mixture. And when you eat this, I knew it had high fiber in it. And I was like, yeah, it has high fiber. And everyone knows that I eat a lot of food, and I eat like a large salad bowl of breakfast all the time. And I was like, it has a lot of fiber, but I'm not tracking my calories right now. How much can it be? So I had my big salad bowl. It was a big bowl of cereal for breakfast. And I was just working here. It was a Friday, had like 20 clients in a row. And I'm just like, almost getting like hot flashes. And I'm walking around, I'm like, I feel like dizzy. Like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. I was bad. And I go, Steven, like, does Catalina Crunch ever like upset your stomach? And he goes, oh, well, I mean, if you eat too much of that, you gotta be really careful with that. It has like 9 grams of fiber for half a cup. And I was like, I think I ate 7 cups worth. Over 100 grams of fiber in one setting. It was, and I actually did it. I don't know if I told you.
The whole box?
I did it 2 days in a row. I ate a whole bag 2 days in a row. I ate the whole bag. So probably over 250, 300 grams of fiber, which most people, it should be like 30 to 40 grams.
Yeah.
I was hurting for a few days. It was,
it is possible. Yeah. And the dizziness, the blood sugar dropping.
I was at home laying and curled in a ball, just shaking for the rest of the day.
The Roto-Rooter.
Yeah. Remember we talked about just like drink water, take magnesium, and you're just gonna have to ride this one out.
Steven, what do I do? Am I gonna die?
But along those lines,
actually, so titrate your fiber.
Titrate your fiber intake, and it also has that effect of drawing water, into your bowels. So drinking plenty of water while you're increasing your fiber is going to be a good idea. As far as where to start, what do I intake? I mean, your psyllium husk is like the classic. Mm-hmm. Most fiber supplements are a psyllium husk base. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody eating psyllium husk just like as part of their meal. It's pretty much strictly in a supplemental form. So that's a tried and true. All of your whole grains, ancient grains, whatever, oats, amaranth, quinoa, things like that. Whole grain oats are going to be a good fiber source. I always recommend the cruciferous vegetables. So your broccoli, your cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus is another good one. So it's going to be plants almost exclusively. And then there are certain fruits like pears, apples. Those are going to be a higher fiber source than, say, tropical fruits like a mango or a banana, something like that. So there's a whole laundry list of high fiber foods. Most high fiber foods are going to contain both soluble and insoluble fiber. So I personally would lean a little more towards soluble fiber as far as being a little bit more important. Soluble fiber, prebiotic fiber, same thing. Essentially the same thing. You consume soluble fiber and it is partially digested. So what happens in your digestive tract is it becomes this sort of gel type substance. It ferments, and that fermentation byproduct is what good gut bacteria feed on. So we can feed our microbiome and help the good guys win by consuming more soluble fiber, aka prebiotic fiber. Whereas insoluble fiber passes through the digestive tract more or less intact. And I kind of describe that one as, that one is the street sweeper.
That's your bulk.
Yeah, that is going to be the bulk. That's going to be the street sweeper that is moving its way through your GI tract. It can be picking up pathogens, carcinogens. It has a way of sort of clearing the pipes. But if, we're having some constipation issues, the insoluble fiber would be more helpful for you going to the bathroom. But the prebiotic fiber, soluble fiber is going to be the one that is going to feed your gut bacteria over time.
Yeah, the easiest way for me to get that stuff in, and I love vegetables, like I eat them, but I like eating them in high volume is not my favorite thing to do. I did that for a long time, and like there's certain vegetables now I just look at them and just go, like broccoli is an example. I don't get excited about broccoli. I eat a lot of it, but I'm not excited about it. I just kind of put it in there because I do get some benefit from it. But mixing those things into your proteins is a really good way to get that in there. Onions is an example. Like it's a good, it flavors stuff up. Like
onions, garlic.
Garlic. Chop those up, stick them into your proteins. Again, if you're going back to like the easy prep type ground meat stuff, Sans what I said about eating the whole steak. If you're still eating ground meat or whole chicken, you could chop those up, put that in there, and it gives it some flavor, gives it some moisture, which is really good if you are meal prepping and you need to reheat stuff. Particularly like if you're freezing it and then reheating it, like if you're doing a lot of that, throughout the week, if you're very planned and you have to do that, like that's a good place to get that stuff in there. So it's an easier way to put that in there. This got mentioned off air, I think, too, like going back to salad bowls.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned this about like the big volume of the foods, but even if you're really in the pain cave, especially like when you're really hungry, just the act of eating food and putting it in your mouth is really, really
take the edge
satisfying.
off.
Take the edge off.
The hormonal response starts there.
For sure. So even if the fiber content of like, you could even go like iceberg lettuce, which is not that much of a higher fiber content or even a micronutrient density, but it has water, you're getting hydrated. But doing that, like a big salad and just being able to eat that. And you get your protein, you get some other stuff mixed in there, some other flavors. That can be really satisfying. It does give you that feeling of being full and it gives you some of those fiber. Or like another one I love is like eating a whole cucumber, like with some lime and salt on it or something like that. Kind of gives that tahini on it. Oh yeah, it gets you some of that like sweet, salty or like salty citrus kind of thing. But a lot of the volume stuff on top of just the actual fiber content of it.
Yeah, it's taking up space and it's scratching an itch at the same time.
Sure. And it's crunchy. I love crunchy.
Yeah,
me too. I'm the same way.
That can provide some psychological benefits as well as being low calorie, high volume, which I think kind of lends itself to the next tip. And you can go a few different ways with the way we are timing our meals. So what you mentioned there could be something to plug in if you want to try, if you're somebody who is going to struggle on a deficit, having only 2 or 3 meals and you have these big gaps between meals where you're just suffering hungry. That's a situation where you may want to space out your meals, maybe do 5 meals, 5 smaller meals, something like that, so that you can sort of scratch that itch between your main meals. And a good strategy would be doing something like that, something that is low calorie, that scratches that itch, but it's not going to push you out of your deficit to maintenance or a surplus. So that's one way you could do it, is spreading the meals out throughout the day. And on the other end of the spectrum, some type of time restricted feeding or intermittent fasting, where we're essentially, maybe you're somebody who actually does better with maybe that degree of restriction. Like, nope, I absolutely do not eat between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. It does not matter how hungry I am. Like,
gives them that structure, right?
Yeah, some people work better with that type of framework. So that's where, we've talked about intermittent fasting ad nauseum here. Intermittent fasting or some type of time restricted feeding approach, you essentially, chop off 4 hours that you would usually be eating. And now we're in that deficit. And you can, as long as you're staying within your calorie goal within that window, you can get in all your calories in that window, and that again provides a helpful structure. So you can either spread it out, do higher frequency, or you can compress it and do lower frequency, fewer meals.
I love that. I love that example and that idea, because some people function differently. There's no one size fits all to any of this, right? Like some people only eat 2 times a day and they're perfectly fine with that. And that structure is the thing that they can latch onto, and that can help them overcome any feelings they might have. I think one of the challenges people face is, particularly in a deficit, is the downtime. Like when you're sitting still, right? When you're not doing, if you're not staying busy, obviously any signals your body might be sending you are a little bit, can be more apparent. And a lot of time that hits around the lunchtime for folks, if they get that 1 hour break or they get that time during the day where they're kind of clock watching. It's like, I need to eat my meal now, but I only have a couple of hours left in the day. I've kind of handled my work for the day. And then they find themselves like in a space where they're kind of sitting maybe in front of their computer or whatever at work, or maybe even in their car trying to get out and change the scenery in a different environment, whatever it might be. But giving yourself that big high volume food takes time to get through. It takes up time. There's work to put it down. Again, going back to like the salad example, like you sit down there and it's going to take you some time to get through there. So it eats up some time while filling you up and satisfying any of the other, sweet, salty, crunchy, type of things that you might be feeling as an individual. Some people more than others. But that's a good thing maybe to plan kind of midday or during that time after that long gap, if you are doing that time restricted feeding. Again, making sure it's got the protein content you need in it, on top of filling it with some insoluble fiber, or maybe some others, some soluble fiber with a little insoluble fiber at the same time, can really help you make it through the stretch that you just went through, and look forward to that. Right, sitting down, I'm really getting a meal in me, and then handle the next stretch of time before you get to the next one, which could involve having a workout in between or something like that.
Yeah, the bottom line is do what you need to do in order to promote consistency and sustainability. How am I actually going to survive this 6-week deficit cycle or whatever it may be? How am I going to be able to execute this on a day-to-day basis as consistently as possible? And that could be, again, yes, spreading meals out throughout the day so that you don't have big gaps where you're fiending, or compressing your eating window if that structure is helpful for you. But I think that, again, we're doing some nice transitions today, guys. As far as the big salad bowl, taking time to eat, that eating slowly, eating mindfully, that can also be a strategy as far as curbing the hunger. People would be very shocked at how quickly they actually eat. If you actually set a timer, like you just prepared this meal, it took an hour, and then you sit down, you set that timer, and you smash it, and it's been like 6 minutes.
Never time.
I can't tell you how many times my wife looks over and she's like, slow down.
You're done already?
Yeah. I'll eat 3 burgers before she eats 1 burger.
Yeah. And when we're shoveling it down, we tend to overshoot and then end up overfed, overfull.
And not feel satisfied.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're still not satisfied. Like, where did it go?
Yeah.
Like, now I got to wait another 4 hours for the next one.
Yeah. So eat slowly, eat mindfully, savor the food that you're having, especially if you're on a calorie deficit and you may not be getting quite as much food as you're used to. That can be a helpful strategy. So a few things, I mentioned setting a timer. That could be a very enlightening experience, like for how quickly you're actually eating. Another tip is put the fork down, the spoon down, whatever you're eating, put it down each time that you take a bite, versus the shovel and the continuous fork movement, where it's fork to mouth every 20 seconds. You can set that down. Sometimes eating with other people can be helpful, as far as you have something to distract you, people to talk to, and that eating slowly, eating mindfully will allow that chemical process that you mentioned earlier to take place, as far as signals being sent from the enteric nervous system, from your gut to your brain, back to your gut. Like, okay, we're full now. So eating slower is also a great way to curb those hunger cravings on the deficit.
I know there's people listening to this going, that sounds so ridiculous, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to time how long it takes me. I'm not going to time in between my bites. I'm not going to think any differently. Like, I'm just going to put the food in like I do every day, 24/7, with all the meals that I eat. Yet they'll go to the gym and they measure every rep, every rest period, right? Every pound that goes on the machine, every minute they spend on the bike, all the other things for that 1 hour or 45 minutes or whatever time they're spending. Like that, they will track, they will be very mindful about, they will know every detail about. But then when it comes to the nutrition side of things, they refuse to put in the same amount of work. Like, to your point, I think it would be very enlightening for people to work on things the same way they work on inside their fitness programs, in terms of tempo, timing, volume, intensity. It's the same stuff. It's their foundational principles, and they work. So for anybody that's just already kind of written that, everything you just heard Steven say, written all that off, okay, keep doing it your way. Like, I'm not trying to.
How's that been working?
I'm not trying to change your mind, but I'm telling you, like, there could be some benefit to this.
I'm going to start tracking RPE meal.
I'm curious
How
as to how
intense was
long
this
it
meal?
would take us to finish your meal. Like, by the time it's prepped, it's on the plate.
I'll win every time. I'll win every time.
I mean,
It's not
that's
a race. I'm just curious.
I'll shovel it in.
Yeah.
Along those same lines, you want to leave some reps in reserve when you're eating. You really do. I'm now forgetting the Japanese phrase that's eating until 80% full.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
that's
about.
eating slowly, eating mindfully can actually help you leave some reps in reserve during your meals. There we go.
Just as it turns out, they're one of the healthiest nations in the entire world, too.
Yeah.
So,
But they also prioritize the nutrition education in grade school.
well, that's what we're trying to do here.
Getting whole foods into the schools. They don't have remotely close to the same obesity issue as we have in this country. So
how's it been working for us, guys?
Fraction of a fraction.
Yeah. Well, we got to be the biggest, the baddest, eat the fastest, eat the most. And
Supersize me.
Yeah, supersize me, exactly.
Sadly.
Supersize me mentality. So those four, and we kind of dove into some different, different digressions on each of those categories. Another one that I jotted down that you alluded to earlier, Scott, was don't overtrain and be realistic as far as I'm going into a calorie deficit. I'm probably not going to be able to work out the same with the same amount of intensity, the same volume, the same frequency, whatever it is, if I'm eating at maintenance or I'm eating in a surplus, and be okay with that. I think that is something that a lot of folks, especially those who are driven type A individuals, they're like, cut the calories, work out just as hard or even harder. And then we wonder why we're dying of hunger, feeling dizzy during our workouts, and just overall low energy level. So adjusting your training to fit the fact that you're in a deficit.
Yeah, it should be complementary there in a lot of ways. And I think, again, going back to physiological and physical responses, like things that will happen when you go into a caloric deficit, you might not get the same pump that you were getting when you were going in. And that's something you need to get over and understand the reasons why. Like you don't have the same amount of calories on board. You may not have the same amount of carbohydrate on board to fill up those muscles. So there's things to think about there. There's also things that you might try doing, right, that can help you get through those periods of feeling that low energy because of the deficit that you're in. And that's when things like pre-workouts can be helpful. Can kind of pull you out. It's not something that we go to right away. And I think people over rely on those things to get them through their workouts because they are overtrained or overstressed or underslept or, all the things. But a pre-workout, getting a little pre-workout in you can help you get through that time, can also calm the hunger down as you're switching on other things. That can be a helpful thing.
When we talk about timing, I don't know if we talked about pre-workout as in a pre-workout, like caffeine, energy, all that, but then a pre-workout meal and planning your meals around your workouts.
Yeah, that's really where I was headed next.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
As far as, we forgot about that point. If you are on a deficit, trying to time the bulk of your calories around a training session, or if you have a particularly taxing training session, like I always know that squats on Tuesdays blow me up, I'm going to need to have maybe a little larger meal. If you are restricting carbs to some degree, and you probably are if you're on a deficit, try to what's the word I'm looking for? Compress your carbohydrate intake around your workouts, or pair it, before your workout, right after your workout, and then you may be relatively low carb throughout the rest of the day so that you can get in your workout, you can have an effective workout, but you're not going to, spoil your deficit.
Well, and you could even, we were just talking about like Tuesdays being the day that I hammer my squats and those kill me. You could even do a little bit of like carb cycling throughout the week.
Say that.
So you could cycle like, hey, I know Tuesday is the day I want to try to train as hard as I possibly can. So the day before or that day, I'm going to onboard even more carbohydrates and kind of borrow from the total calories from another day. So that could be a really good tool as well.
Yeah. And it's important to work in, net averages essentially.
Yeah. So you go 2 high days, then maybe followed by 2 low days. This is carb cycling. So 2 higher days, and then I go 2 lower days, then maybe back to a high day, then a low day, and then back into my cycle again. Yeah. That can be personalized for you based on, again, your workout, your work schedule, what's going on the weekends, how you're handling yourself there. That's a very good strategy. The carb cycling, it kind of keeps things moving in a little bit of a different pace, but also keeps you supplied. And so you kind of know, especially like on your second low day as an example, like, well, tomorrow's a high day, so I just got to get through this. So it can go back to that structure and knowing what's coming and being planned can be really important there. So that's
psychologically as well.
For sure.
Again, going back to like the psychological and then the physiological response that comes up.
Did we talk about any like liquid calories?
I was just going there next. Yeah.
So I think liquid calories, I mean, that applies a lot to protein, but I think in general, just limiting liquid calories.
Yeah. I mean, a good way to fill up that stomach is to stop at the protein shakes. Like as convenient as those are and as easy it is to make sure you push, I would use those infrequently. I would replace that with real food, with whole food,
for sure.
Right? And again, those are generally more protein based type things. Maybe they have some fruit in there or something like that. Whatever you're putting in there, but I would move away from those if you're moving into this deficit and try to get all of your calories from food for number one, the feeling of fullness, but also the thermic effect of food that you're going to get from that. And keep this in mind too, just because you're putting 40 grams of protein in your shake and sticking it in your gut doesn't mean you're getting all of that protein. You're much more likely to get the amino acid profile that you're actually trying to get from the protein itself by eating whole foods. There's a good amount of that could be passing right through the gut, especially if you're eating less as it is and you don't have that fiber in there to back that up and slow that process down. So removing removing the protein powder from your diet is one of the first places I would go, as you're starting to dig into these deficits or go a little bit deeper into them. Again, not if it's going to take away from your total protein consumption, but figure a way around that. That's a really good strategy.
Yeah, when I think of liquid calories, I think of caffeine. Actually, something that could be to your benefit. Yeah, as you clutch that beautiful EDC themed ghost there. No, not suggesting that you replace the calories you've cut with caffeine, but caffeine can have an effect of curbing appetite, and you could potentially get maybe a little bump as far as caloric expenditure goes, and that can help you get through your workout. So that that comes back to the pre-workout discussion. One thing that I heard or was reading a little bit about as far as having like 0-calorie bubbly drinks, so your sparkling water or a Coke Zero or whatever type of like 0-calorie soda, that can also create a little more feeling of fullness, and it can be a little bit satisfying. You may want to be drinking more water in general when you're on a deficit, especially if you're seeking the fiber, you're seeking protein. That can lead to a little bit more, feeling of fullness. But I tend to think that there's a little more satisfaction in kind of the carbonated beverage. So, maybe it's a carbonated energy drink. Maybe it's a sparkling water. Maybe it's a Coke Zero or whatever your 0-calorie soda of choice. That could be another way to help increase feelings of fullness. As far as the negative end of the liquid calories, you can sabotage a deficit by getting sneaky calories through a drink that you don't actually, you're not really realizing how many calories is in your, super duper mocha frappalapa.
Yeah, exactly.
Jabba gabba blabba.
Yeah.
It's a milkshake with a little bit of coffee in it, and it's 500 calories. So I would say that, if you've been at this for a while, I would say most people are aware of that like drinks contain calories, and some of these, pre-made ready, drinks that you pick up at the coffee shop or whatever may have a lot more calories in them than you realize. So a couple things to keep in mind as far as the liquid calories. That's pretty much all that I have, unless you guys have more.
I guess my only tied to
what have we not covered?
I think just slightly tied to that too is like I'll be a little bit more aware if I'm on a deficit of like my oils and things like that, like fats for that. Maybe using a lower calorie option or not using an oil, cooking in methods like I'm gonna do a crock pot instead of normal cooking so I don't have to use oil. Like things like that is another thought. It's kind of tied to the liquid calorie thing. So.
Yeah, the fat side of things gets tough when you move into that deficit and you're really trying to figure out where you're going to get your calories because proteins tend to get a little quote unquote drier, right? When you're working in these deficits to find where you take those things out. But generally speaking, I think a lot of people go straight to carbohydrate and they cut that out first. And so one of the things to think about on that is, again, that blood sugar response, that insulin glucagon response, what happens and maybe moving towards more carbohydrates that are a little lower on the glycemic index, those that have that impact on your blood sugar. So as an example, you're probably going to get a little less from like a potato than you would from like white rice. Again, you could also get more fiber from the potatoes if you're eating the skins on the potatoes, and you can get more volume, right? So, a cup of for every cup of rice, you can have like a cup and a half of potatoes or whatever. So again, take a little bit more to get down, take a little bit more to digest, oftentimes. And again, you can onboard a little fiber there, but moving to carbohydrates that are a little lower on the glycemic scale. Think about things going back to the proteins in terms of managing your fat on these caloric deficits is, things like one of the foods that I really go to if I'm really watching my fat or really trying to control is I love shrimp. They're usually easy to get. They're high in protein. You can get them pre-cooked, so they don't take a lot of preparation. You can have a high volume of that. It's tasty. It's a nice change up. Going back to the calorie cycling thing, especially on those lower calorie days. I like those shrimp, or whatever. But again, like think about how you're choosing your carbohydrates. Things like bananas. If you're that person that always puts a banana in your shake or whatever, or in your protein shake, and you're trying to move away from the high glycemic foods. And, the protein powder, you could be having a little bit less of an impact on your blood sugar spiking if you're moving to more glycemic carbs. I don't want to go into too much detail on that, but because those can affect or impact people a little bit differently.
Glycemic index versus glycemic load. Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
People get a little bit confused there. And I don't want to get too much into that, but the point of that is get the higher volume foods that don't impact your, again, potatoes versus rice is a good example of that. You mentioned things like quinoa. Those grains, some of those grains are a little higher. Do a little bit of research, figure out, how to get your grains in, or how to get your carbs in without those spikes that you might be feeling from it. We mentioned, pre-workout or caffeine, which is most of these pre-workouts have a certain level of that or derivative of that in there, is a good way to kind of maybe boost the mental clarity a little bit, boost the nootropics and things like that can help you kind of just stay a little bit more aware, a little less moody. That might
brain fog.
Yeah, a little less brain fog, which is tends to be a downstream effect of going to a deficit. There are other supplements out there. There are different herbs that can curb your appetite a little bit. I don't want to go too in depth in that, but a lot of those are sometimes inside those pre-workouts, or you can get them in a capsule. Those are things. We've talked about nicotine on the show before. I know a lot of physique athletes that actually vape, during their deep caloric deficits, because that does curb the appetite. Put something in their mouth, gives them something to do, keeps them busy, their hands busy, that kind of thing. And they're doing that. I don't necessarily say, I'm not suggesting you go out and vape, but I know a lot of physique athletes, believe it or not, that do that. It's part of their protocol. Nicotine, like if you're going to, the pouches, the nicotine pouches, like brands like Zyn or whatever else, that could be helpful, again, for mental clarity, as well as curbing the appetite a little bit. Again, if that's not your game and you don't like playing around with that stuff, then don't. I'm just saying those are effective, things that you can put in there to maybe help with that a little bit if you're not already doing that. We did a whole episode on nicotine. We've done them on nootropics and things before too. You can go back and listen to those episodes. But there are, people will put some supplements in, again, going back to fiber, like you may be scooping that fiber into something that you're drinking. That's a way to kind of get that fiber in and help curb the appetite, slow the blood sugar response down a little bit. So there's many different things here, but none to take away. When I put that at the end because I want to handle all the foundational principles first. And really what it starts with is just, I think what you said is being mindful of a few things, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day. And that's, are you getting your protein in? Are you truly well, first off, are you in an appropriate caloric deficit?
I love that. Yeah.
Appropriate.
First things first.
Do you even know where your maintenance is, and are you even there? Because if you're starting a deficit below maintenance and you've been below maintenance for a period of time, months or even years, you may need to be doing some reverse dieting to come out of that to then go into your cut, and you'll feel a lot better, and you'll probably have a lot better results from a lot of different levels if you do that. So we've talked about that before, but and I don't want to get too off piste here with regard to that, but an appropriate calorie deficit is obviously the place that you have to start. And to Steven's point, it's like maybe 300 to 500 calories into a deficit. That's 500 is going deep. Don't overdo it. Like you said, like, again, if you're already in a 500 calorie deficit and you're taking another 500 off of there, you're going into 1,000 calorie deficit, you're going to see a result. You're in a deficit. But how long are you going to see that for that metabolic adaptation takes hold? And now you don't have many calories left to cut. And then if you're being really mindful about the types of calories you're getting in, then what are you eating? What's left on the table? A plain chicken breast, 4 times a day. Like, if you don't set yourself up with a good plan here, not only are you going to feel the natural effects that we've already talked about being, but you're going to be fucking miserable. And it shouldn't be like that. It doesn't have to be like that.
You're not going to stick to it if you're miserable.
100%. And it may work, and you may lose a few pounds and you may get a little bit leaner, but what's going to look like on the other side of that? How much cleanup work or digging ourselves out of this deficit in our bank account are we going to have to do? And then where does that put you the next time you try to come through on this, or when I say that, go into the next deficit because you put on a bunch of body fat in a shorter or a faster amount of time than you wanted to. And it's like, oh, I got to get back again.
What was that term that you used a while ago when we did another one of these podcasts? You were talking about nutrition and people who go into a calorie deficit and then they come back out of it and they put on more body fat.
Body fat rebound.
Fat rebound.
Yeah. Which is super common. Anybody that's ever gone into a deficit knows what that is. Like, even your physique athletes know we overdid it that time, right? And it takes some figuring out. So why not save yourself a bunch of pain and suffering, right? And disappointment and or frustration by just making sure you're set up right in the first place. And then stick to the foundational principles. There's a lot of things that you could add into the mix, maybe from a supplement perspective, to curb some of these things that are going on, but it isn't the answer to getting through a successful deficit and period of weight loss /fat loss. and this is not something you can stay in forever. So what is your plan to come out of this? When you're going into a deficit, which is another big component of this. Like, okay, so how do I reverse out of this process so that I don't gain back, I don't have this body fat rebound and then put myself in a worse position, moving forward. Those are, again, people are all about losing body fat, but they never think about like, well, when does that stop? And when do I need to put a little bit back on? Nobody ever thinks like that.
Yeah,
right?
They view it as a final destination,
Yeah.
like 6 months from now. And then, well, what about the rest of your life? What about maintaining what you've actually done over the last 6 months?
Yeah, and what's healthy, and where should we be, and what do I need versus what do I want, and how does that impact my performance, my lifestyle, and all the other things. So, yeah, man, it's good stuff. No, I think we pretty much hit the basic stuff, and then we went on a little bit of a side trip there with some other things that people can add in. But calorie deficits are a natural thing. Our bodies are used to doing that. They do things very normally when that happens. If you keep those things in mind, if you're well planned, set up an appropriate plan to go in and come out and or fluctuate through there. We talked about calorie cycling and things like that. There were some little nuanced things that we put in there. The bottom line though is let's not overcomplicate this. Be aware of what you're getting yourself out into, and then how do you come out of that? Are the key structures here, I think, for success in the long term.